Make-A-Wish Foundation meeting in terms of people that I could hope to speak to about this topic. Don and I met at the Nuclear Infrastructure Council last month, where I gave this talk on what the global landscape is, how countries, not just companies, but countries are adopting national nuclear energy strategies in the global landscape that Dr. Mainini started to get into about China taking the lead. And then lastly, how is that sorting itself out in the three key regions in the United States? And therein lies the impact for Virginia as a, let's say, as we're going into football season, a skill position player in the top tier region. That's how I see it. So Virginia's not alone. We are in the best region for nuclear development in the United States, in the country that leads the world currently with the largest operating base and with the biggest nuclear navy. So we've got some stalwart pillars on which to execute a national strategy and Virginia's role within that. But the landscape is very harsh right now. So we'll get into that. So those are the three sections of this. What I'm going to do, since Don mentioned that the slides will be available to you, so I'm going to clip along and give you the highlights, okay, in those three areas: global landscape, national nuclear energy strategies, and then our role as a leader in the Southeast region, the key region in the United States, I submit. So what we observed as we look out into the landscape is that there are market forces and policy forces that are determining how countries shape their strategies based on their capacity in supply and demand factors. That's the framework that I think this presentation, Don, offers this group in terms of channeling the insight from industry and from academia and government. What we observe in our analysis that we did at GMU is that there are three evident national nuclear energy strategies. Renaissance, which you've heard about. Rollback, which we see in places like Germany and Belgium. And then restructuring, which is an intermediate strategy where countries like Canada and the US haven't fully resolved the policy momentum to move into a Renaissance strategy like Korea and China and India have adopted. And then I highlight the three regions. The growing South, SEC conference is the easiest way to put it. Sorry about ACC players, but SEC is where most of the reactors are being built.
You mean Southwest or Southeast?
You meant Southeast.
I meant Southeast.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for catching that. Urban and Industrial Mideast, or the Big Ten Conference, the metal benders, historically, and then the Inland Mountain West. I leave aside New England and the West Coast, where I'm from, because they're not favorable toward nuclear. So we don't need to talk about them when we talk about U.S. regions. It's that simple. Okay, so these are the summary points for this group. As Dr. Mainini started to get into, there's about 70 gigawatts of reactors under construction, and more than 70% are in Asia, not in NATO. So this is a big shift in the global landscape. There is some opportunity to build reactors in North America to replace old ones, but cheap gas is killing nuclear in the United States. In fact, I would say North America. Little load growth, it's less than 1% now. And then license extensions, we don't have any yet out to 80 years. But license extensions to 80 years could be a threat to new construction. David has more insight on this than I do. So the primary markets for new reactor construction, which comes back to Virginia, where's the market going to be? It's going to be overseas. There is some replacement market in the US, but we have to be export-oriented as a state and a region and a country. That's one of the takeaway messages. Could we move on Generation 4 reactors as part of that strategy? That's a question mark we're trying to resolve at the policy level. As a result, the international alliances are going to be paramount in seizing those international opportunities. It's not well known in Congress, on Capitol Hill, that both of the primary reactor vendors in the US, Westinghouse and GE, are essentially dominated by the Japanese. Westinghouse is outright owned by Toshiba. Hitachi dominates the partnership with GE. It's not well known. So the transition has already happened in terms of this global landscape. What's interesting that was revelatory to Congress is that when you get outside the United States, most of the new reactors, we're talking about 200 gigawatts or more over the next 30 years, will be purchased by sovereign entities. Now I know Dominion is sovereign, David, but I'm talking about countries here, okay? The Secretary of Energy in another country operates reactors. And so national entities, not utilities, is the model outside the United States. So we have to recognize this. It's going to affect our strategy, and it enhances the importance of international alliances. Virginia can play a solid role in rejuvenating America's position in nuclear as a vital player within the growing Southeast region. So we've got some key industrial players. Many of those are in the room. Those are going to be pivotal to executing this assault on the export market. My own background was at DOE. I moved out to Virginia in 1998 to work in the Energy Policy Office, where we did the first business case for new nuclear power plants at DOE. The Deputy Secretary of Energy at the time in 2001 came in to the office, Frank Blake, who now heads Home Depot, and he said, "Bill, why are we funding $500 million of research when nobody's building the reactors? Give me a business case on one in 3 months." And so that fed into the analysis that ultimately became Title 17 in the Energy Policy Act, which we were involved in helping write. And then in 2009, within the Recovery Act, that whole program went up on steroids. So it went from 0 loans to now a portfolio of $34 billion in loan activity by DOE. DOE was never a banker until 2009. So this is part of the finance and policy background that myself and Walter Howes bring to this. So quickly, to do a flyover, this is the current landscape. The way this chart works is, this is the percentage of electricity drawn from nuclear. So you see France here is 70%. We're at 20%, but big horizontal bar in terms of absolute total number of megawatt hours of nuclear. China and India are still small, but they're growing the fastest in terms of new construction. We face a question mark on new construction after we build Vogtle and Summer. Dominion's been talking about North Anna. We'd like to see that go. That would be a showcase project if that unfolds. But cheap gas, as I mentioned, is complicating the scenario. What's interesting geographically is that the current base of 435 reactors is concentrated in the North OECD, which is a hockey league, or countries that host Winter Olympics. That tends to be how this sorts out geographically. The burgeoning countries are the newbies. They're the ones that want to buy nuclear power. And so this is the summary. The growth is going to be in Asia and the Middle East, and we've lost some capabilities to make major components like forging, steam turbines. Now maybe BWXT or Riva, you guys are helping build some of this infrastructure potentially. We'll see what happens, Mary Alice. I use this with one side of the aisle in Congress because the current secretary, Ernie Moniz, when he was at MIT, wrote a path-breaking article, Why We Still Need Nuclear Power, 6 months after Fukushima. So he wrote that while he was at MIT. Now he's the energy secretary. And then Jim Hansen is who I use for the Sierra Club. Okay? Here's the leading climate scientist, formerly with NASA, now with Columbia, advocating nuclear power plants as part of the solution to climate change. So by balancing those political overtures, you can get 60% of the Congress. That's enough. That's enough to make a strategy and move forward. And here are the newbies. This is the map of what is called the International Framework for Nuclear Energy Cooperation at DOE. The observer countries in green, the countries with reactors in blue. And so you can see even after Fukushima, there are a number of countries that are interested in purchasing if they can work out the finance, liability, and some of the technical agreements. So why, in fact, are countries even looking at building reactors? And I want to give you a flyover of some of the drivers which then affect this body's deliberations on what can we do about policy. Well, how is that going to affect the drivers that are accounting for new nuclear construction in the wake of Fukushima? So in 2012, Bipartisan Policy Institute with Senator Domenici, a prime mover in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, came out with this: maintaining U.S. leadership in global nuclear energy markets. Whoops. 2013, CSIS, restoring U.S. Look how much we lost in a year. Here's the UK. The UK got drunk on North Sea gas. Sound familiar? They went to sleep on nuclear. So they came out with a report regaining their nuclear future. Korea is in the race now, and so we came out with our volume with the Atlantic Council, redefining leadership through international alliances in nuclear energy, because there is no country that can do it alone, even America. That's one of the take-home lessons here. So we developed this further in terms of defining what national nuclear energy strategies were. We presented this at the Nuclear Infrastructure Council, where Don was participating. This is the group of companies that want to build reactors. Nuclear Energy Institute is the lobbying group for current operators. A little bit of a distinction. So this is what Dr. Mainini was talking about. Here's the pie in terms of the global landscape on operating, but here's who's building. So you can see the separation there in terms of where the new construction is going to be. So this will display it geographically to you. This is where we were in 1990. Global nuclear operating landscape. This is where we are in 2010. Pretty much stasis. But here's where we will be 20 years from, 15 years from now, in 2030. Why? Population. Nuclear energy is clean power for urbanization. Asia is taking the lead in that because they have the most population growth and they have massive urbanization. 5 million people moving to cities in Asia per month. That's like the entire state of Oregon in a month. So that's a big driver for nuclear. If you take this chart and then you place it in this kind of NASA context, there are more people living inside this circle now than outside. So it's not just growth, it's density as a major driver for nuclear energy. When I was in Seoul last November, one of the Koreans said to me, where do we put our solar panels and wind turbines? We live in high 20-story apartment buildings. How are you going to power these? Here's population density. Look at the intensity, particularly in China and India. Here's another reason why solar doesn't work as well in China. Smog, clouds. The air apocalypse of January 2013. We discovered, because we put an air sensor in our embassy in Beijing, that the government, lo and behold, was lying about the level of air pollution. And so we released the real stats and the shocking level of air pollution in Beijing. If this causes a social revolt in China, they will take action, which is what they're starting to do. And it's why I think they're building more reactors than anybody else.
I was there.
You were there? How did you breathe?
Designer.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is not an exaggeration.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. In addition to that, one of the challenges we have, again, in the United States is Look at our market share in PV solar now, blue line.